Joining me now is Senator Alex Padilla of California, a member of the Judiciary Committee who participated in today's hearing. And Senator, I want to play for you. Thank you for being here this evening. I want to play for you one of your exchanges with FBI Director Wray. Take a listen. This was on law enforcement.
Do you believe there's a concerted effort by right-wing extremists to infiltrate law enforcement agencies?
We work very closely with both our law enforcement partners and our military partners in their efforts to address any kind of violent extremism that may be in their midst. We view that as, in effect, a kind of insider threat, if you will. And they do too. When there are bad apples in the midst, we work with our partners to try to get ahead of it.
The sort of bad apples answer. Were you satisfied with that answer?
Well, it was the beginning of a conversation. Obviously, the need for additional questions, additional fact-finding, additional inquiry. The FBI themselves have said this is a concern. And given their relationship and coordination with law enforcement agencies across the country, I think hopefully there's an opportunity here to figure out what the best practices are for identifying and weeding out these quote-unquote bad apples so that law enforcement returns to a position of regaining trust in the community and not just protecting us, but respecting us.
You know, we've had for a very long time conversations within Black and Latino communities about law enforcement and about worries that law enforcement harbored biases. But we're now talking about, you know, there have been for many, many years conversations about whether or not extremist groups were attempting to deliberately infiltrate law enforcement. We've seen instances where sort of, you know, Klan activity. We saw that in South Florida among law enforcement, where, you know, this sort of bias and extremism plays out in their everyday jobs. And now we have the acting chief of the Capitol Police saying that this same sort of milieu of groups wants to blow up the Capitol. If you've got 3%ers who are basically law enforcement and military, if you had people with badges showing them to Black police officers who are also getting called the N-word hurled at them, do you think it should be more urgent to start looking at law enforcement and the military to try to weed out white nationalists and other extremists?
Absolutely. You know, in law enforcement across the country and even different branches of the military. Look, it's not lost on a whole lot of us, right? I'm talking about my colleagues here in the Senate, both through observation and through feedback, the differences in how the Capitol Police and greater law enforcement community in the Capitol prepared for and responded to peaceful protests last summer after the killing of George Floyd versus the deadly insurrection that took place on January 6th. And some of the initial inquiries, some of the initial investigations have already highlighted some officers who, you know, there's reports were either directing, you know, providing directions for insurrectionists, may have been helpful. They were taking selfies with them. And what kind of response to that to a violent mob? And so the more than red flags that are being raised, they will be looked into, and whether it's Donald Trump, his enablers, or anybody involved with the planning and execution of the insurrection on January 6th must be held accountable and use that as a basis for how do we plan and prepare for the future to ensure safety going forward.
Yeah, indeed. Not to say nothing of the Proud Boys and the questions of whether they've had too close relationships with police. It's all very weird. But I do want to ask you before I let you go about this Neera Tanden nomination. What do you make of the fact that Republicans who for 4 years were absolutely silent and would run from cameras at the vulgar, misogynistic, racist, Nazi-cuddling commentary of the President of the United States, along with one Democrat at least one Democrat, Joe Manchin, essentially torpedo the nomination of a woman of color and are setting up more people of color. They've got an interesting observation of the people that they don't like. Javier Becerra, Deb Haaland. People of color seem to have a problem with Republicans supporting their nominations. What do you make of what's happened with Neera, given the fact that the former president was a constant racist, misogynist, et cetera, and they seem fine with it?
Well, let me be blunt. It's an insulting double standard. And I tried calling out during your attendance confirmation hearing in committee, right? It coincided, by the way, with the impeachment trial. If you want to hold somebody accountable for offensive tweets, let's be consistent, not hypocritical. I called the double standard out when I was introducing Attorney General Becerra in Finance Committee last week, as he's up for confirmation as Secretary of Health and Human Services. I have lived through that double standard throughout my 20-year career in public service, and now we have the voice as a United States Senator to call it out in this venue. I hope that President Biden finds another spot for somewhere in the administration. She's a tremendous asset, can be very helpful for the administration and for government as a whole. But we will address and call out the double standard at every turn.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully he will, and somewhere where she doesn't have to get Joe Manchin's permission to serve in the service of her country. Thank you, Senator Alex Padilla. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.